Hey, gorgeous. Welcome to the Hormone P.U.Z.Z.L.E Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Kayla Smith, CEO of the Hormone P.U.Z.Z.L Society, a woman's health hub for fertility, hormones, and the business of coaching, creator of the Hormone P.U.Z.Z.L method, an infertility warrior, two-time boy mom, and women's health expert. This podcast is for women struggling with infertility, painful periods, terrible PMS, or really any symptom of hormone imbalance that they are ready to eliminate for good. Tune in weekly because we will be interviewing amazing experts in the field of women's health, breaking down those hormone walls, nerding out on nutrition, and having way too much fun. Whether you're just beginning your fertility journey or you've been struggling for years, we are going to finally help you put those pieces of your hormone puzzle back together so that you can get pregnant and eliminate those pesky symptoms for good. Are you ready? Thank you so much for tuning in. Now let's get started on your road to transformation. Robin LaCross is a holistic health practitioner who specializes in women's reproductive health. She has been using and teaching natural birth control methods for over 25 years. Robin is passionate about empowering women to make sure all girls grow up knowing and understanding their bodies. Robin believes that by changing the way parents talk to their kids about sex, we can reduce unintended pregnancies and the spread of STDs in the world. To this end, Robin founded the HPV Education Project to raise awareness about the virus and the problems it causes. She also created a pair of online interview series called the Raising Empowered Daughters Summit and the Raising Empowered Kids interview series, where she interviewed over 40 experts on a wide range of topics designed to empower parents to communicate freely with their children about growing up, sex, relationships, and staying safe. Robin helps parents to prepare for these challenging conversations by offering online training programs, private coaching, and through her weekly radio show, Holistic Sex Ed Radio. Hey, Robin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Kayla. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, awesome. So tell me a little bit more about just who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, well, I've always been very passionate about women's reproductive health, and it comes from my experiences while growing up. Like many of us who find passion in our work, it comes, from something that happened to us or something in our life that really fires that passion. And for me personally, I was just like an average kid growing up doing my thing in the world. And, sex really wasn't something that we talked about, in the household. And my parents weren't physically affectionate with each other or anything like that. And as I was growing up, my mom, she did the best she could. She taught me about menstruation. I got sex education in school and all these kinds of things. Yet what I found, especially looking back, the hindsight, 2020 hindsight,
Right.
is that, even though I got the best that my mom had to offer, I got the best that the school had to offer. I grew up in a liberal state. They tried to educate us, this kind of thing. But even still, by the time I became sexually active, I was clueless about my body, how my cycle worked, any of this kind of stuff. And thank God I didn't get pregnant. The first time I had sex was at 14. Of course I knew I didn't want to get pregnant. And I had made the decision to give my virginity to a person of my choosing rather than somebody who was trying to take it away from me. I was abused, sexually abused as a child. And so when I decided to give my virginity to a person of my choosing, my frame of reference for avoiding pregnancy was that I knew dogs got pregnant while in heat. So I figured as long as I'm not bleeding, I'm good. When children don't have all the facts, they fill in information with what seems to make sense. And, I grew up on a farm, I knew that dogs got pregnant during heat, no idea that the human body is completely different.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's really where, my passion starts, is in that place of really being ignorant about my body. My mom put me on the pill at 15. By the time I was 20, I didn't want to be putting artificial hormones in my body anymore. And that's when I realized I really had no idea how to protect myself from getting pregnant, even still at the age of 20. And that led to a quest for information. And in that quest for information, I discovered all kinds of really cool stuff. Like my body was, everybody can see their period, it's like, you get a period, but what you don't see is like, when ovulation happens. And so when, the actual window that a woman can get pregnant is actually fairly narrow. But because we don't have education, there's just like this ambiguous, nebulous, like, oh, if you have sex, you'll get pregnant, kind of thing, which we instinctively know isn't necessarily true. Yeah, it could happen. But when you have that, like that knowing, like, oh, well, that's not really 100% true. And so therefore, it's like you're especially your immature mind, the mind of a teenager can come up with all sorts of things. And even adult women, we do the same thing. It's like we think, oh, well, I probably won't get pregnant. Or then we have unprotected sex. And then we spend the next 2 or 3 weeks worrying that we got pregnant. Are we pregnant? How my period comes, all this kind of stuff. And so there's just this whole big gray area of knowledge that women don't really have a good grasp on. Because what I discovered in my quest for information is like, my body is like sending me all this really cool information that I can learn to identify and interpret and actually make reproductive decisions around. And being that I wasn't somebody who wanted to get pregnant, once I knew when I was fertile and understood how my body worked, it's like, I am not having sex during these times because I don't want to get pregnant. And I knew from the information that my body was sending me that it was a definite possibility. I was a young, fertile woman and definitely did not want to get pregnant. And so, as I discovered this stuff, I was like, wow, what if my mom had known this stuff to teach me? What if every young woman grew up knowing and understanding her body to this degree? It's life-changing. It was so empowering for me personally. And I just know that it would have such a positive impact on people's lives, because when you don't want to be pregnant and you suddenly find yourself pregnant, it's extremely stressful. It's like all of a sudden your world is not in your control anymore. And I really want to give young women, teenage girls, young girls, growing up long before they're sexually active, the information to be able to make these decisions, to have that kind of control's not the right word, but those abilities to make those kinds of decisions, because when you get pregnant, that's a life-changing event.
Yeah.
And we don't want teenagers getting pregnant, and even young 20-year-olds, like, let's give people the opportunity to grow up and figure out what they want in life, and where a child may fit into all that, rather than just being, thrown into the frying pan and, and like deal with the situation. Yeah.
Yep. And I love that you're talking about this, because I think it's so important. I say, like you, I grew up thinking you have sex, you get pregnant. It was that simple. But with infertility and with the infertility community, I find so many people don't understand their body. They don't understand how it works, when they can get pregnant, when they can't. And just having that knowledge alone is sometimes enough to fight through infertility and get yourself pregnant. So it's really true about this.
It's really true. And, over the years, I've taught women about natural birth control methods, fertility awareness, this kind of stuff. And I've helped a number of women get pregnant who were struggling with infertility. And, sometimes it can be just as simple as having sex at the right time. It's like, there's nothing wrong with you. It's like, and you get people who are like, oh, I'm going to do natural birth control, so I'm going to chart my basal body temperature and use this to get me pregnant. And so like they start taking their temperature and they see their temperature go up. Oh, temperature went up. Let's have sex. It's like, yeah, you just missed your window, like 100%. You will never get pregnant if you're waiting to your temperature goes up to have sex. And, just like, that those simple little things that, how could we possibly know? Nobody teaches us,
Exactly. So. Yeah. And I always say that your period is your body's report card, and it's telling you. You need to be listening to the things that it's telling you. So let's kind of dive into that.
Sure.
Let's talk about healthy menstruation and some things that you can do to make sure that you are menstruating healthily.
Yeah. So in general, we tend to think of menstruation as something, as it's a cycle, it repeats on a regular basis. And so we have the textbook myth of the 28-day cycle. Okay. And I call it a textbook myth is because every woman's body is unique and her cycle will be unique to her. And so some women may, cycle on the 28-day cycle. That's a moon cycle. A lot of women will cycle on 29 days or, it's not the quote unquote 28-day cycle. And what I think this is my personal opinion, where this comes from is that when the medical people are learning about fertility and the menstruation and the menstrual cycle and all these kinds of things, it can be a lot easier to say, menstruation or ovulation happens right in the middle, kind of thing. And if you have a 28-day cycle, then you do have ovulation around day 14, because what happens is the luteal phase of the cycle tends to be more consistent than the pre-ovulatory phase. And so the pre-ovulatory phase can be affected by stress, sickness, illness, all these different things, hormonal conditions, this kind of thing. So when ovulation happens can be affected by what's going on in your life. Once ovulation has happened, there's a chain of events that's unfolding. It's all controlled by hormones, and generally a woman's luteal phase after she's ovulated tends to be pretty consistent. And so when you have, the 28-day cycle, then ovulation is happening right smack in the middle. In general, the post-ovulatory phase tends to be around I'm going to say more like probably 12 to 14 days kind of thing. If you have 11-day luteal cycle, then you may run into fertility issues because progesterone doesn't have enough time to properly prepare the uterus to receive that fertilized egg. And so you may end up with miscarriages and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of little issues that can happen to contribute to the issues that come along with infertility. But in general, 28-day cycle, and I kind of forgot exactly what the original question was as I went up on that. So, did I actually answer it?
Yes, you did.
I love talking about the cycle so much, and I can get totally lost in the details of how it all works, kind of thing.
Right, so. But just in general, what can we do to make sure that we're having healthy menstruation? Do you have any tips or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. So if you're finding that you don't have a regular cycle, figure out what's normal for you, which is actually where I was going with that, is figuring out what's normal for you is the first thing to do is, and I encourage people to chart their first day of their menstrual cycle, mark that as day 1 of your cycle. That's the first day of your period. And then you can count and see, is there regularity or is your cycle irregular? So if you don't, menstruate in roughly the same amount of time, doesn't have to be consistent every cycle. My cycles average between 27 days and 29 days. That was what was normal for me. So what you do is you find what's normal for you. And then if it seems like, your cycles are very unpredictable, or maybe they're very painful, or maybe you bleed a lot, or maybe you hardly bleed at all, whatever is going on for your cycle. And for a normal, healthy cycle, what we're looking for is, a consistent length of time for your cycle, from first day of one period to your next, first day of your next period kind of thing. And we don't want it to be too painful, too clotty, this kind of thing. Yes, menstruation does come with symptoms, and it is encouraging us to take that quiet time for ourselves and that kind of thing. It's like our body is going through a hormonal event. It's actually the withdrawal of hormones, which is what's causing the uterine lining to shed and this sort of thing. And so what we're looking for is just basically, you want to have that consistency. You don't want to have it take you out every month. And if you are experiencing a lot of symptoms that make life difficult, then there's different things you can do. You can look at your diet. You can look at, basic care of the human body 101. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting enough water? Are you eating properly? Are you hydrating? I guess that's, enough water. But, like these different things, like, are you managing your stress levels? Are you, removing yourself from toxic situations? Are you being exposed to, chemicals that interfere with hormones, kinds of things, endocrine disruptors. And so, like, looking at your life to see, like, are there areas that I can improve? That can be one way to help bring balance to your cycle. Another way is you can also use herbs and sometimes supplementation. If you happen to be somebody who has a nutritional deficiency, sometimes when you're in a nutritional hole, it can be difficult to, like, get yourself back out of it. Like, take vitamin D for an example. A lot of us, live in cold climates, and so maybe we don't go outside half of the year. Some of us live in very hot climates, and maybe we stay out of the sun for half of the year. And so, it's like you need a certain level of vitamin D to be happy, healthy, have an efficient immune system, a functioning hormone system, all these different things. And when I live in Arizona, okay? And one of the things that I do is I analyze blood chemistry. And interestingly enough, I live in a sunshine state, yet I've seen some of the lowest vitamin D levels here in Arizona because we're taught to stay out of the sun because the sun is really hot, and so what we do is, we have our clients, like, supplement with vitamin D. And so we get to see, like, how much vitamin D does it take to get out of this hole, like for somebody who has a vitamin D level of 5, and you want to see it anywhere like 50 to 80, maybe even as high as 100. There's different opinions on, like, what is a good range, but in general, probably over 50 is a good range to be in. And so, like, how much vitamin D supplementation, or how much time do you have to at least actually spend out in the sun to get it back up? It's quite a lot. And so, like, what we've found is, like, supplementing with 5,000 IU of vitamin D kind of keeps you maintaining. But if you want to, like, dig yourself out of that hole, you need to supplement with more. And so the same kind of thing can happen with, the menstrual cycle too, with our, our nutritional things. It can sometimes take a lot of effort to consume the amount of nutrition that you would need to consume in order to make a difference, to dig yourself out of that nutritional deficiency. And so things like juicing or doing smoothies, can be really great ways of taking in high quantities of nutrition. And especially if you don't like taking pills, like, I'm not a big pill person. And if I do have to take supplements, I do encourage people to, use a food-based multivitamin, try to have that as natural as you possibly can. And, there's also a lot of herbs that are really great to help balance the hormones, the menstrual cycle. And again, it really depends on, like, what your particular, set of symptoms might be. Some women have a lot of PMS. Some women bleed heavily. If you're a heavy bleeder, you might want to, like, drink nettle tea to help put back your iron, and some of those trace minerals. And so, so just depending on what's going on with your body, there's a lot of, things, natural things that people can do to help bring the cycle back into balance.
I love that. And I love we talk about food a lot on this show. So that's, I love that you're talking about diet. And I agree with vitamin D. I think it's so very important to have enough vitamin D for sure. And so, talking about that, do you think that you can over supplement with vitamin D, or it's kind of like you can take up to 5,000 IU and you're fine?
Yeah, you can. I've taken 10,000 or actually 20,000 IU over short periods of time, just to kind of, like, bring the levels back up to a level that's more in alignment with optimal health, basically.
Gotcha.
And, you don't want to do it for long periods of time. You want to monitor it if you're taking, high levels. I know, some physicians will give, I believe, injections, I'm not positive, of, like 5,000 IU of vitamin D, or have, like, a high potency supplement like that, which I know that you can get. One of my favorite vitamin D supplements is by Metagenics. They have these little tiny little capsules, and I'm not a pill taker. I hate pills, but, I could take a little tiny gel cap. Like, I could take 4 of those at once, no problem, But
I do the same. Yep.
It's definitely not enthusiastic about taking pills. And so anything that can make it easy on me, I'm I'm all for that.
Yes, definitely. I agree.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So talking a little bit more about stress. So how do you think stress plays a role in all of this? We hear a lot that it's one of the biggest factors in infertility, and, it's a big factor in an unhealthy menstruation and all of it. So talk to me a little more about stress and how you think that plays a role.
Sure. Well, menstruation and stress are both hormonal events. So when you are experiencing stress in your body, your brain perceives whatever the threat may be, and then your adrenal glands get the message, oh, there's some danger out here. And so we're going to squeeze out some cortisol, and we're going to, and if you're in a situation where you're in chronic stress, or, like a situation like maybe have a stressful work environment, or your relationship with your partner is stressful, it's like if you're in that stress response on a long-term basis, your adrenal glands going to be working overtime, like pumping out that cortisol. And so you're going to live in a higher state of anxiety. You may not have as much bandwidth to deal with the crises, or, the external factors, the people in your life who are pushing your buttons, or, the person in front of you that, is in your way as you're trying to get to your appointment and you're late. It's like all these things create stress in our body. And, it's tied into our survival mechanism, our fight or flight, like way back when we were evolving as humans, and all animals have this, response of like, oh, I'm about to be eaten. I need to run away, or I need to fight back, or I need to like be prepared to defend myself in some way. And so all of the energy in the body goes into those survival mechanisms. And so we know that when we're in that chronic, state of, flight or fight or whatever the case may be, there's also fear, there's also freeze, different people respond to stress in different ways. But regardless of how you're responding, what your body is doing is it's sending energy out to other areas of your body. So to your extremities, because you might have to run away, or you might have to fight back, or that kind of stuff. And so your energy is not going towards things like food, like digesting your food. It's not going towards reproduction, this kind of stuff. And so when you're faced with intense stress, your body is, going to take the energy away from the uterus, away from the reproductive organs, and it's going to be harder to get pregnant. It's going to, really make your cycles more irregular, just all these different things that can happen because, chronic stress is like a monkey wrench in the body's hormonal, machinery, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's definitely has a major impact. And so the things that we can do to help reduce stress levels, things like meditation, moving meditation, getting out and exercising, removing ourselves from those situations, talking about them with, supportive people, blowing off steam, there's lots of different ways that we can help to mitigate that stress. But ultimately, the real goal should be to remove those sources of stress from our life if we can, from our lives if we can.
Right.
So, can't always, but we can definitely do as much as we can to help do something about it. Like if your child is a big source of stress, like you clearly can't get rid of your child,
Right.
So you have to figure out strategies to deal with that stress, like both with your child, for example, and also within your own mind. Like you have to have like sanity breaks so that you can, just de-stress and unwind a little bit so that your body can have a break too.
Right, exactly. And I always talk to my clients about, this is a season in your life, maybe you're trying to get pregnant, maybe you're trying to balance your hormones, but let's look at what's on our plate. And if there's some stressors that can be removed, let's do that. Mm-hmm. And so I really like that you're talking about that as well. It's so very important.
Yeah. I mean, like stress, like work stress lots of people have stress at work. And, I found myself in that situation too, like where my job was creating more stress than it needed to. And I was taking it home at night and it's disrupting my sleep. And after a point I was like, I just can't keep going on like this. And so I made a change, and best thing I ever did was quit my job.
Yep.
Best thing I ever did.
Same.
Yeah, and so it's like you have to take the time to identify what those sources of stress are, and you just, I don't know, maybe you could. I won't put words in other people's mouth, but for me personally, like I wasn't prepared just to go quit my job because it had got to a place that sucks. It's like I have no safety net. It's like I have to make a smooth transition from one thing to another, and so it took time. Yeah. But I was able to create that situation where I was able to put my boss on probation and fire her.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like I was like, okay, this is not working. I started doing some work for somebody else, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll do this for you, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm going to be putting most of my attention over here. And afterwards, I was just like, I am not enjoying working for you. This is too stressful. This is still not working. I'm just done. And so I'm like, yep, sorry, love you, but I'm out of here.
Right.
I am so out of here.
Yep. And I think it's so empowering to do that, to take control of your own life and say like, this is not serving me. So let's do something else.
Yeah. And I did exactly the same with the thing when I was on the pill at 20. It's like, I do not want to put these hormones into my body anymore. And so what can I do differently? And so led to a quest for information. But the things I discovered blew my mind and changed my life in unbelievable ways. It's so empowering. And now this is the work that I do. I help other women, discover their own bodies and learn how to, chart their own fertility and use that information to serve them and their purposes, whether it's to avoid getting pregnant or to achieve pregnancy.
I love that. So let's talk about that. Tell me a little more about how that works and how, I am not a fan of the pill. I try to steer my clients when they come to me, if they're on it, to get off of it. And, if they've been off of it and they're having issues, we try to work through that. Because I find a lot of people come to me and they've been through years of pill and now they can't get pregnant when they want to get pregnant. So let's talk a little bit about that natural family planning and how you teach that.
Sure. Yeah. And I will say too, a lot of times when young women are put on the pill, it's to address uncomfortable symptoms of menstruation. And so what that does is that creates a situation where symptoms are being suppressed. And so maybe there's an issue. Maybe they have ovarian cysts and don't ovulate regularly, whatever the case may be. By using the pill, we're suppressing those symptoms rather than addressing them. And when it comes time to come off the pill and get pregnant, those situations may still exist. And at this point, they may be very deeply entrenched. And so it can take people a lot longer to get pregnant. As far as when it comes to cycling, let's just assume that everyone is, and this, for at least this, educational scenario, that people are cycling normally, and this is how it works in a normal cycle. So when menstruation happens, it's actually the end of the previous cycle. And because conception did not occur, the uterus is clearing out the uterine lining and making way for the new cycle and the new potential for life. And so when menstruation starts, we're at the lowest point of our hormones in our cycle. And once menstruation happens, what starts to happen is the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, starts to be produced by the brain. It's all controlled in the brain, but we won't go too deep into the brain chemistry just to kind of keep it simple here. So when the follicle stimulating hormone starts, what it's going to do is it's going to act on the ovaries, and it stimulates the follicles to get those eggs to start ripening. And so what will happen is there'll be a group of eggs that starts to develop. And as these follicles begin to develop in the ovaries, what it does is they start to produce estrogen. And so there's like a little switch in the brain that gets tripped when the estrogen levels rise to a certain point, and the brain says, okay, we got enough, egg follicle action happening here. So we're going to tone that down a little bit because we actually just want, one egg for ovulation, not 6 or a dozen or whatever.
Right.
It's like, we're not making puppies here.
Right.
And so what happens is as the estrogen levels rise, another hormone gets released by the brain called luteinizing hormone, LH. And so what it does is its job is to kind of suppress all the action that's happening in the ovaries. And it's going to say, oh, you look like the most sexy, ripe, ready egg out of the whole bunch. And so I'm going to pick you. And we are going to take you to maturity. And so what luteinizing hormone does is it suppresses all the other eggs that didn't quite make the grade, takes that one choice egg and says, all right, we're going all the way with you. And so the luteinizing hormone surge actually is a very short window. It actually happens in, of course, about 12 hours or so. So luteinizing hormone just shoots right up. All these other eggs get suppressed. That last leg, finished ripening and ovulates. And so that moment where the egg leaves the ovary, that is ovulation. So ovulation is an event in the cycle. So up until that point, all of the things that have been happening, the follicle stimulating hormone, the estrogen levels have been rising, and the estrogen actually has an effect on the uterus. And so as this is happening during the early part of the cycle, the uterine lining is starting to get activated and starts to develop in preparation for when ovulation happens. So when ovulation happens, the egg leaves the ovary and there's a little injury that's left behind. And the luteinizing hormone acts on that injury and turns it into something called the corpus luteum, which means little white body. And what its job is to do is to produce progesterone. So once ovulation happens, the egg is just kind of like floating there in your abdominal cavity, and the fallopian tube says, oh, come here, little egg, and scoops it up inside. And then there's little hairs on the inside of the fallopian tube, and they gently work the egg down towards the uterus. Now, if there happens to be sperm hanging around, lying in wait for ovulation, what happens is fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube, and then it takes about days for the egg to actually make that whole journey down into the uterine cavity and implant on the wall of the uterus. So as it's going, so as the egg is in the fallopian tube and all this stuff is happening, when the injury in the ovary is turned into the corpus luteum, its job is to produce progesterone. And so, as I mentioned previously, when ovulation happens, the body temperature, that temperature rises after ovulation occurs. Why this is happening is because of the progesterone. Progesterone, one of the effects in the body is to very, very slightly increase the body's resting temperature. Now, you wouldn't notice this unless you were actually tracking your temperatures, your morning resting temperature, with a basal body thermometer, which essentially is a digital thermometer that can measure tenths of a degree. And so what happens then at that point is the progesterone is working diligently on the uterine lining to finish getting it ready in case that egg is fertilized. And by the time the egg that's fertilized gets there, if the egg has been fertilized, it will implant on this side of the uterine wall. And then what happens is we have a chemical messenger that goes to the brain and says, hey, we got a bun in the oven here. We better keep that corpus luteum active and producing progesterone until the placenta can take over at about, I believe it's around the 12th week. So without that message, that goes back to the brain. So when that fertilized egg implants on the uterine wall, that sends that chemical message. Now, if fertilization does not happen, now what's important to know that the egg is only capable of fertilization for 12 to 24 hours, something like that. And at that point, it's not viable anymore. So if sperm isn't there waiting for the egg, then we don't have fertilization during that cycle. And so then the egg just kind of breaks down. After about 10 days or so, the corpus luteum says, oh, I'm tired and I'm healing over. And so my, progesterone levels are going to start to drop. The corpus luteum heals over. And at a certain point, the endometrium that's in the uterus can't sustain itself anymore because there's not enough progesterone to keep it going. And so therefore what happens is it starts to break down. The very first thing a woman might notice is maybe a little bit of moisture between her legs, because water is the very first thing that's released. And then the next thing that comes is the rest of the uterine lining, and menstruation begins. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it works. And of course, there's other things that are happening too. So as the estrogen levels are rising prior to ovulation, estrogen has a really profound effect on the female body. It helps us feel more sexy. It's the time that we're most likely to throw birth control out the window if we're with a partner and things get very passionate. It's like, yes, that is estrogen talking, and you're probably about to ovulate right now. So you might want to like go back outside and get that condom that you just threw out the window or whatever, you know.
If you're not trying to get pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. If you're trying to avoid conception, exactly. So if somebody is looking to conceive, you know, or not, whichever the case may be, it's important to know that estrogen does have, you know, create symptoms in the body that can be identified. For example, our cervical mucus changes in consistency. And this is a really important thing for somebody who is either in particular looking to get pregnant. But if somebody's looking to avoid pregnancy, you really want to make sure that you have sperm out of and away from the vagina well before any fertile mucus appears, because very healthy sperm can live for at least 5 days. And I personally think I've encountered sperm that can live 7 days.
Wow.
3 to 5 is the norm. I've heard rumors of sperm living 10 days. I don't know if it's true.
Oh my goodness.
I'm pretty sure they can, some of them at least can live for 7 days.
Yeah.
But so what I teach my clients who don't want to get pregnant is once you start menstruating, like unprotected sex is off the table until you confirm the passage of ovulation. And I know I'm kind of like skipping over the fertile mucus a little bit. So let me go back to that here, because I'm getting carried away and ahead of myself. But as the estrogen levels rise, the cervical fluids do go through a whole series of changes that we can identify. So as estrogen levels start to rise, we may experience an increase in discharge. And some women may mistake that for yeast infections or think that there's something wrong. 100% normal. It's normal for a woman to produce varying amounts of fluids from her vagina over the course of the cycle. 100% normal. So as the estrogen levels rise, you're going to see a change in consistency. So as fertility increases, the fluids are going to be more of it. They're going to get stretchier. They're going to get waterier. At the very peak, it may look like egg whites. You might be able to stretch a bit of mucus between your fingers and like have like a stretchy bit that you could play with, you know. So the fertile mucus and the basal body temperature tend to be two of the most obvious symptoms and ways of tracking fertility signals for people who are interested in either, you know, using those methods to monitor their fertility. There are other methods too, which I do teach those as well. Like you can monitor the changes in the cervix. There, you can measure luteinizing, hormone levels, which to me, that's not really effective way to monitor fertility, because that's such a small window, and you know, it's interesting and something that we can track, but not really practical if we're trying to achieve or avoid pregnancy.
Yeah. I love that. What a wonderful sex ed education that we just got. That's amazing. I wish every high school taught that.
Yeah,
like
totally.
you said. But yes, so important. And I always talk about, you know, tracking your basal body temperature, tracking your cervical mucus, because those are things that we can tangibly see that can show us what our body's doing. So I love that.
Yeah, really valuable information. And I encourage everyone to do it. At least learn what's normal for you. You know, it's like I spent a couple years just really diving in deep, tracking my cycle and like really like being detail, you know, oriented, writing down everything I was, you know, mood, you know, cravings, like just really, you know, like moon cycle. I had this really cool chart where I would like color in like the days of the moon cycle where I was bleeding. And so then, you know, when you have this card full of months of moon cycles, you can see like over the course of the year, like how your cycle lined up with the moon and all this kind of stuff. And it was just really cool. Like I totally get into all that stuff.
I love it. Well, awesome. Well, as we start to wrap up, tell us how we can work with you, where we can find you, all of that.
Yeah. So right now I have a radio show that I am doing called Holistic Sex Ed Radio. And so you can find me there, holisticsexedradio.com. And I'm available on all the podcasting platforms. My show is live weekly, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And, so you can tune in there. If you would like to learn more about my work, or I have a really amazing webinar that I put together that teaches people about the female cycle. So it's all about like the stuff that we just talked about, complete with images and graphics, so you can like actually see what I'm talking about. I know it's one thing to hear it, but then it's also kind of cool to be able to see like the patterns of the hormones and how it's all laid out on paper, so you can get like that visual impression of it. So I have that free webinar that if people are interested in checking out, all about the female cycle. It's called Understanding the Female Body and Cycle. I know it's a very creative title there. I'm very practical, straight to the point, that sort of thing. So yeah. Awesome. And if people have questions, I help, parents talk to their kids about sex. I also, help women who are dealing with HPV. I'm a holistic health practitioner. And so one of my previous experiences, again, we tend to be passionate about things that we've experienced, kind of thing. I've had history with HPV and dealing with that naturally. And so I help guide other women who are dealing with HPV and the problems that causes cervical dysplasia, these types of things, heal their cervix naturally without, the invasive surgical procedures, which can put fertility at risk. So
yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Robin. I've really loved talking to you. You are a wealth of knowledge. Well, so any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really passionate about is making sure that all girls grow up knowing and understanding this information. So if you happen to be a parent, or even if you're not, take the time to educate yourself about the female cycle and, share with your nieces, share with your nephews. The boys need to know this information too. And I think if boys have a greater understanding about what menstruation is like, that they would be less likely to tease girls about it. They would also be more compassionate, boyfriends, spouses, partners, type things when it comes to women, dealing with these kinds of issues, and maybe make it a little less uncomfortable for them, because a lot of our discomfort comes from the discomfort that society feels in general. And, men pretty much know even less about menstruation than women do, right? It's like, we know what to do with the flow, but we don't really necessarily understand like the hows and whys, and how to suffer less if we happen to, have a really challenging menstrual cycle. So
yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Until next time. Bye. Thanks for tuning in today to the Hormone P.U.Z.Z.L.E Podcast. Check out the show notes for today's episode at CoachKayla.com. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a review. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next week.